this is a bit of a special video. It was originally done in Spanish for the channel Conceptos Básicos, but I have just, made a little arrangement and translated it into English. You can find the original on the link pinned in the comments. I hope you enjoy it. It's about philosophy. I looked at the chalk body on the alley pavement. It was an ancient corpse. Its past dates back to the 16th century when rationalists and empirical philosophers sought answers to the great questions of knowledge and began to move away from Christian explanations. Medieval humanity took its suitcases and left as soon as Copernicus discovered that the sun was the center of the solar system. And here is the beginning of a scientifical and rational era. Ah, the scientific method and the Renaissance. What nostalgia. Then modernity was young, beautiful. Everyone wanted to dance with her. Hello my dear Nighthawks, I am Quetzal, a grumpy cat that has been banned from smoking in YouTube. In short, to understand postmodernity, we must continue investigating the corpse of modernity. Where were we going? Yes, rationalism and science. A few centuries later, another group of pale European chuds proclaimed the Enlightenment. The French Revolution left a scar in political philosophy, and from then on, scientific reason would start to be applied to history and government. Things improved a lot. We owe the educational system and the resurgence of democracy in Europe to the Enlightenment, although some of us still suffer from parasitic monarchies. But the Enlightenment began to lose its glamour in the 18th century when the Germans decided to invent this thing called Romanticism, and guys like Goethe or Hölderlin caused a cultural earthquake that would be the first cracks of modernity. But no, none of them kill her. But before the death of modernity, there was a similar case that I had to solve, the death of God. These three gentlemen here were in charge of making things no longer sacred, although cats still are. Nietzsche was the one who proclaimed the death of God, reflecting the reality of industrial capitalism. Darwin further distanced us from God. Now we know we didn't come from Adam and Eve, but from apes. Or at least you come from apes. And Freud told us that our free will was really subject to the uncontrollable drives of the subconscious. Modernity and God were never close friends. But this blow hurt him a lot. She went to God's funeral with a tulle veil and tears running down her mascara. Nietzsche dies in 1900s. His last words are, "Mother, I am an idiot." Two world wars break out hand in hand. Europe ends up in a mess and everyone ends up traumatized. Some German philosophers, Marxists and Jews fled the Third Reich and took refuge in the United States. These were the members of the Frankfurt School, focused on cultural and sociological criticism, who attempted to reconceptualize and modernize Marxism after the failure that the Soviet authoritarian regime meant for them. Two examples are Adorno and Horkheimer, two rancid gentlemen who hated jazz but analyzed the post-war political state perfectly in their book Dialectic of Enlightenment. The Enlightenment had wanted to create totally rational governments with long-term historical objectives, promising that history was a path of progress. But all that science and rationality led to the gas chambers and the deadliest wars in history. Disenchanted by the derailment of history, Adorno proclaimed that poetry cannot be written after Auschwitz. He was wrong, of course. In the 1960s, France was in full cultural ferment, and May of 1968 in Paris was an example of that energy to protest against capitalism. In this context, the writings of Herbert Marcuse were very popular, particularly Eros and Civilization, in which he philosophized around Freud in the era of the hippies. But in that spring revolution, there were many philosophers and academics who came together to promote their own theories within the movement. and thinkers that would emerge later, such as the famous Michel Foucault, which I don't have time to summarize here. Let's focus on the main suspects. On one side was Jacques Derrida, the Algerian post-structuralist with a deep and captivating gaze. He dedicated his life to studying language and grammar until he deconstructed the words that had configured the logos of society and philosophy, demonstrating how thought traditionally conceived as rational was subject to semiological criticism. It sounds very complicated, and that is because it is. Suffice to say that with his French pretentious texts, he delivered another stab to modernity. Yes, she died from many stab wounds. Do you know what it is to kill a god? Have you ever played a Japanese video game where a bunch of teenagers just decide to kill God? Well, he has a lot of HP. The next suspect is Jean-François Lyotard. This bastard was the guy who coined the word postmodernity and thus attacked our victim. In his book, The Postmodern Condition, he told us about meta-narratives. And this is the most important thing about postmodern theory. A meta-narrative is a story that we collectively tell ourselves based on an idea of progress, such as the Christian idea that there will be a final judgment and that in the end the sinners will be punished, the righteous will be rewarded, and that somehow everything is focused on a final meaning. The Enlightenment and modernity promise great meta-narratives, such as the idea that science would free us from the bonds of nature, or perhaps the political revolution that Marx proposed, in which we could reach the end of history, the end of the class struggle. And then there are the promises of fascism that swore we would revive I don't know what mythological past or national glory that never really existed. After 2 world wars, there was little room for utopia, and the meta-narratives of the great ideals were rusty. It is true that meta-narratives still exist today. There you have the American exceptionalism and the chosen people of Israel, but they are increasingly becoming obsolete. Postmodernism would not be rigid like the old political stories, it would be liquid, complex, atomized. This also affects the ways we understand science or contemporary art, in which small narratives serve to explain social and political transformations. The grand plans and the immense maps and complete systems of the philosophy of enlightenment were no longer satisfactory to explain reality. After all, there are more things in heaven and earth that can fit into your philosophy. But speaking of technology, the third dagger was just stabbing the corpse, and it was by the bastard Jean Baudrillard, the Matrix favorite philosopher. We are already in the 1980s, and he publishes Simulacrum and Simulacra, a controversial book about our relationship with technology. To explain it simply, the philosopher immersed in the world of television and advertising proposes that our addiction to the ideal images of capitalism end up in a certain way replacing reality. When we no longer interpret reality from direct experiences, but from simulations, they hack our brains and make us desire the simulated dreams of capitalism. The map, it's up the territory, and beyond the simulation is, as Morpheus would say, the desert of the real. With this final stop, Baudrillard ended what little was left of modernity. Or rather, he did so with the help of technological and social development of the 20th century, with the help of 2 world wars. But if I have learned something from being a European, is that blaming the French will make me popular. Baudrillard plunged his dagger into the depths of the mummy of modernity until he disintegrated its truth into interpretations and distributed it among the cathodic lights of television and billboards at the outskirts, where unattainable paradises are always presented to us. simulations within simulations until the truth becomes neon vapor or napalm spread over the heads of good postmodern citizens. In conclusion, the 20th century was a series of catastrophic misfortunes, and here you are now, watching a simulation of a cat on a screen talking about simulations because an algorithm recommended it to you. How alienating is all this, right? Have I already told you to like and subscribe? They force us to say like and subscribe. Wow, it seems like my planet needs me. I have wibbly wobbly stuff to fix, but you already have the basic concept, right? Well, you already know what postmodernism is. Bugger off!